My name is Jack Fitzgerald. I'm the co-founder of the Warren Bennis Leadership Experience at the University of Cincinnati. In this episode of Bennis Stories, I interview Will and Kate Bennis, two of the three children of Warren and Clary Bennis. They share personal insights about their parents, their own thoughts on leadership, their father's legacy, and more. The Bennis family have been integral to the work happening at the University of Cincinnati with the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute. We are grateful for their willingness to share with us. This interview is a treasure and should be listened to by all who have any interest in learning more about Warren. Stick around until the end to hear Kate read the famous letter Warren wrote to her on her 13th birthday. The letter contains heartfelt reflections from Warren on his life and years in Cincinnati. Enjoy the conversation.
So I'm Kate Bennis, and I'm a communication coach, but really my profession is that I'm a professional actor. And after Dad died, a guy reached out to me and said, "Oh, I guess your dad was so interested in theater because you were an actor." And I said, "No, I was an actor because my dad loved the theater and loved performing," right? Didn't he, Will?
He did.
He did. So that's what I do. I'm a communication coach for leaders.
And my name is Will Bennis, and I am Warren's son, if that's not obvious. And I am a psychologist by training, a research psychologist. I study how culture influences basic psychological processes and mostly morality and decision making. And that's what I'm trying to go back to doing. But for the last 10 years, I was running a co-working space in Prague.
Well, it's great to have both of you here. I remember where I was when I met each of you. Kate brought me a book by Shakespeare. It was a complete collection of Shakespeare, and she said this was my dad's favorite author. She even got
I was going to say that's a dad move. But
Totally.
Nice, Kate.
Yeah. And I had the chance to meet you, Will, in Cleveland at your mom's house. So we'll talk about both of those individuals today. And with that, just either one of you to start, but who were your parents? Who were your parents?
Will, you did that great, ancestry peek into Dad's history. Do you want to?
Yeah, and into mom's. And mom's history was a lot easier because she has relatives with really unique names, so you could find people, and they were in America for a long time. Dad's family wasn't, and I got stuck with his parents, basically, not much further back. And I also have a bad memory, so I won't be able to really recall a lot of the details. But our dad was born in the Bronx in 1925. You probably know that more or less anyway. But and he grew up in the Depression. I mean, in a sense, he was a child of the Depression. I think that had a really, really big impact. His father tried various businesses after he lost his job that were not successful, and struggled. And I think my dad watched that struggling and grew up kind of feeling like life is hard, and that, like a lot of children of the Depression, had a big impact on his drive and ambition and sense that he wanted to be sure that he was self-sufficient. But he did it. I think, when I hear that story, which he'll tell, or he would have told, he has told, it kind of belies the route he took, which was very, I think, he became an academic. He didn't become a businessman. He didn't study business. He went to a university and studied, really, in my sense, kind of, he was interested in literature, and even and kind of taking a path that I don't think really was, I just want to be successful. So it's interesting that I do think he was really ambitious, really wanted to be a success, but he still took a path that was very humanistic, if that makes sense.
Wasn't that also driven by when he heard about what tenure was? Like,
I don't know. Tell
this
this story.
Get fired. He thought, oh, tenure means you cannot lose your job.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I think that's why the academic route was for him, like, wow, they can't fire you. His dad kept getting fired. Was his dad like helping load trucks in the during Prohibition for the mob, you know, loading.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah. And dad was
And
like,
after losing a job.
yeah.
Wow.
So I think he was, yeah. Sorry.
And it was also the GI Bill, you know, I mean, he got to go to college paid by the government because he was in the army. And that, I think, was an opportunity that felt like he could go anywhere. And he went to college when he was older too, which I'm sure had an impact, because
Yeah, he was
he
about like
first went
25,
into the
yeah.
army. You probably know better than I do. I don't know how old he was. That
He was
could be, you know.
24, I think. Wait a minute, is that right? He started in the army with like 18, 19. He was in Germany, right? And
Yeah,
then
I
he
mean,
ended up
even in
staying on.
17, before he turned 18, because at the time you could go for your initial training before you turned 18,
Wow.
and he did.
And then he ended up staying in Germany in the
Yeah.
occupation, during the occupation, for a couple years, and then went to Antioch. And do you remember the story about how he heard about Antioch College, Will?
I don't, but when you say it, I'm sure it'll be familiar.
I think, as I remember, there was a guy in his platoon they thought he was super old. He was like 26. And he had gone to a place called Antioch, and dad didn't know anything about anything, but he knew that they had a co-op program, which brings him to Cincinnati, right? Like they had a co-op program, which meant that he could probably work and get credit for it while he was at school. So honestly, I don't think he'd ever heard of Yellow Springs, Ohio. It was a lucky place to go. You know, some really interesting people were there, but I don't think he knew that.
And as a coincidence, his Clary, our mom's mother, also went to Antioch.
Mm-hmm. Which is actually, looking into it further, I think she went there for a semester.
Oh,
okay.
I think she was like totally homeschooled, and her uncle was making a bridge there or something. He was a engineer, and I think she just, while she was there, she went to college.
That's not where they met, though, right?
No.
Oh, no.
But that is really a coincidence that they both would have spent some time there then.
Well, it was my mom's mother. Yeah.
Your mom's mother.
My grandmother, our grandmother went there for a semester.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, our parents met in Cambridge when mom had graduated from college and dad was maybe working at MIT. Is that right, Will?
Yeah. He would have been working at MIT at that time, I think.
Yeah.
The story that I think is interesting about your dad, and I want to get to your mom. I think he tells this story about the shoe polish and how he I think the language he used in one of the books was, and that was when Warren Bennis was born. He brought his shoes into show and tell and showed how he could polish different shoes. I don't know if this is a story that he would have shared within the family, but I know it's in at least one of his books.
That's the only place I know it is from the book,
about polishing
Invented Life, maybe.
Yeah.
But he talked about how he would imitate other people. Like, he didn't know, when he had a uniform in the army, he knew how to dress, but when he got to MIT, he was like, oh my gosh, I better smoke a pipe and wear tweed. Like, he had no idea. He kind of put on a costume, bow tie.
Wow.
He just didn't know. He said when he talked about himself as like a teenager, it was like he was this unformed, kind of vague thing. And he was surprised himself, I think, about how he got where he got.
But I think, and this is something that I don't have, and I think my dad did have, which I think he was he was obviously a good mentor, but I think he was a really, really good mentee. And that's part of this observing other people and copying other people's behaviors and actions, was kind of, you learn how to do something by first pretending to do it in a way, and then eventually you figure out how to do it. And that really asking questions and being interested and curious as a kid, basically at university with these faculty member, I think today, when kids don't have much respect often for authority, I think that was a really valuable characteristic, because then he really did absorb a lot and learn a lot in a way a lot of people don't.
I heard something recently. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
No. I just would say, like, he didn't come from a family that would have taught him a lot about the more intellectual world that he was stepping into. And so you're right, Willow. I think he practiced, he watched how other people, what dishes did they use? What forks and knives did they use? It was really like he was very observant because he was from the outside of that world, he felt. Sorry, what were you going to say, Jack?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I heard something recently. It was like, to be interesting, you have to be interested, or to be, I forget which way. It's either interested, to be interesting.
No, but where did I just hear that as well? To be interesting, you have to be interested. But that sounds like something Dad said.
Yeah, I just heard it, but
I did too.
And it's funny about emulating people, because if I'm remembering correctly, like he looks back on his time in the war and points out several figures that he appreciated. And then even Doug McGregor at who was at Antioch, right?
Yeah.
So
that's who he went to MIT with to get his PhD after Antioch, and then continued there.
So McGregor was the president, right, of Antioch?
At that time, yes, when your dad was a student there, because I remember him saying that, McGregor would bring him into meetings, as a student. Like he would go to meetings with him and just found himself in these spaces that he wouldn't have been otherwise. And
absolutely. I mean, that was one of his first great mentors, I think, was McGregor.
But Dad did the same thing. He brought students into meetings all the time. So I didn't know he learned that from McGregor.
Me neither.
Yeah. So what about your mom? Where is your mom from?
Do you want to talk about that, Willow?
Well, I mean, sure, but I don't know so much about her childhood. She was born in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, but she lived,
I can tell you why. Do you know why she was born in Bryn Mawr?
No, I have no idea.
So her parents didn't have any money. So when they built those houses in Cleveland, they were all really poor. It was they
really? I thought he had already.
No, and they didn't have money for a hospital. And so Kay Williams, our mother's mother, our grandmother, Kay, had a best friend named Peggy Bach, who lived in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. So they went to Peggy's house to give birth to my mom because they couldn't afford a hospital. And Peggy Bach is the mother of Derek Bach, who was the president of Harvard. So Derek was a few years younger than my mom, and they kind of grew up together. Mm-hmm.
But they lived their whole childhood, except my mom went away to schools, but in that Cleveland house that you saw. And so my mom's parents built, with a whole group of people, built that whole village in Cleveland. That whole set of houses was a planned set with a group of people, and our grandparents were involved in that. And my mom grew up there as a kid in that house, and then left when Kate will know how old she was when she went, I guess, to Madeira. Is that the first place she went?
Well, the first place was Warrenton. She went to a school that's no longer there, in Warrenton, Virginia, during the war, boarding school, and then Madeira.
Very young, and I guess she had really bad allergies in Ohio, and that was part of the incentive to leave. But when she came back, they were gone. But she then was gone from Ohio until our grandmother, her mother, passed away in 1994, I think. Yeah. And then went back for a year to clean out the boxes, and 20 years later was still there, and there were several more boxes to be cleaned out by then. But I don't know how much time you got to spend with our mom, but our mom is you guys
Wait,
both
you're there.
froze. Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Our mom is warrants, not Warrens, but warrants several books on her, because she's just one of the most amazing, difficult to fathom, very artistic in a way, like just notices and appreciates things for what she sees in them that I think I personally don't see, and she sees just so much beauty and what's really there in certain ways that are amazing. And I am not going to be as eloquent as I'd like to about how the two of them complemented each other, but they're such different people in terms of communication, in terms of so many things, but they loved each other so much, even though they didn't stay together, but they stayed very, very close till the end.
I only got to spend a little bit of time with your mom. I probably there were like at least maybe 4 occasions of spending time with her, and we attended a city music in Cleveland, a city music event with her. She seemed very passionate about this city music organization. So it was an evening of guitar playing, and she was recognized at the event, and everybody there knew her. And when they gave her recognition, she kind of put her head down, type. So I've only had these like snapshot experiences with her, but it seemed like the arts were very important to her. I know that was important to her mom as well.
Absolutely.
The story is that her grandmother, our great grandmother, dear Sunny, who had no money and raised 2 girls on her own, would not eat for a month so she could go to the opera. And she sent our grandmother Kay to dance for Isadora Duncan. But then when Isadora wanted to, I guess, she adopted all of the dancers. I don't know if you know who Isadora Duncan is, but she was one of the founders of modern dance.
Okay.
But she adopted all the dancers, and my dear Sunny said, no, she can't do that. So it was like really years of matriarchal, artistic women. My grandma was a playwright. And so mom really, really felt strongly that art needed to be supported. Her house was full. I mean, dad writes about it in a really funny passage in here about all the crazy people in her house in Cincinnati, but that's how mom lived till the day she died. She had artists. I'm actually working with a woman right now who found me because she lived with mom for 3 months when she was doing a rotation in her medical degree.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And it would be slightly false to suggest that her kids always loved that, because I don't think we did. Or I, for one, there's a beauty in it, and I appreciate it now. But there were some pretty, when you're willing to give and give and give, there's also a willingness of some people to take who are not always the most giving people in return. And so it was a strange environment, sort of, with people coming through who sometimes probably weren't the best people to be around young children.
Yeah. So what? Well,
you might have to edit that out, Jack.
No, we're good. One quick story from my experience with your mom, and then question. We were at lunch at her house on another occasion, and she said, oh, someone else will be joining. He's been living at the house for 6 months. He's a student at the Cleveland Institute of Music. So just even
always. Yeah. But I mean,
um,
Kate's point, I mean, these were amazing people, and they over and over again. I mean, so many of those people who were students living at her house who are musicians are important figures in different orchestras around the United States, and love her. I mean, the love that is felt for her is amazing, and the stories. And
can I just read something from this which talks about this in 1976?
Yes.
I guess what was funny was that he talked about this guy Mitchell Rose, who was living at our house.
Your dad wrote this. My
dad wrote this in 1976.
But I mean, Mitchell Rose is a famous dancer, modern dancer.
Yeah. And Mitchell Rose came, and he was living at our house. They sit down for dinner at midnight at our house. And here's, I don't know if you guys see the picture of the house. Okay. So they sit down for dinner at midnight, and he says, this isn't even the part of it. I guess what is funny is that I told him that our house had been occupied over the past year or so, and for years going back to Buffalo, with one Israeli looking for a job ever since she moved in, 2 students at the university, a friend of your grandmother's from Cleveland who was looking for a job with your mother's help in arts administration, Bruce Hoppel, a holdover from 2 years before, who was going to move out a year and a half ago but never got around to it. And 3 members of the same dance troupe as Mitchell's, 2 ladies, 1 lord from England, 7 filmmakers, 47 guest speakers, ranging from Northern Ireland's ombudsman to a former director of the Santa Fe Museum, and refugees from all over the world who use our home the way the CIA uses safe houses, as a haven for the super clever and the penniless who sing for their supper.
Oh my God.
There you go. Isn't that awesome? And the best part about this is then they go back how Edna had said, this Israeli woman had said to Mitchell, does Warren even know who you are? And he was like, I don't know. Do you know who I am? And at the end, Mitchell says, do you think somebody could just live here and you wouldn't even know it, like a stranger could just come in? And he says, who knows? And then he says, let me just finish this because it's hilarious. I told him that it was altogether possible, that it's just possible that Jonathan, who is right now sleeping in a pouch bag in the library, is a total stranger. But then so was he. And the long and short of it is, our life is filled with people. So that was it.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, yeah.
And even just the foresight to write it down, like he must have known. I mean, your parents had to have known, or the thought had to have crossed their mind at some point. Like, do you think that was just normal to them, though? I think it was just.
I think it was normal to my mom. I think Dad had to kind of, what do you think, Will? He had to kind of come around to it, I think.
Absolutely. I think this was part of his, maybe part of his love or attraction for our mom early on anyway, was this lifestyle that was so foreign to him, I think. And but interesting and exciting and diverse and very different from his childhood, I imagine.
Oh yeah.
So sorry, go ahead.
No,
I was just gonna say, I think was an incredible adapter to different environments, and that this was an environment too that he adapted to.
So looking at your childhood, growing up kind of with these two amazing individuals, like what was it like for the two of you to grow up as a Bennis?
So Will, do you want to?
Sure. I mean, so it's different. So when I was a kid in Cincinnati, our dad was a workaholic, and he was gone. As far as I remember, he was gone from the house to the university before I woke up in the morning. And generally during the week, he was back after I was already asleep. And so I saw him on the weekends. And even on the weekends, my memory is he spent a lot of time in the office up in the attic. And when he was working in the attic, he didn't disturb him. And so most of my memories of that time with my dad, almost all of them, were when we were on holidays, which is when we did spend time with him. And were really nice times, but I didn't see him much. And then my parents were separated when I was in 6th grade, and I really became close to my dad as a father, I think, more when I was an adult. After they were separated, he lived in California. We would go visit in California, and that's when I felt closer to my dad as an adult, really. Not a full adult, I was still a kid, but for him, it was, after that.
I would imagine. Yeah, I would imagine, Will, like given your area of focus and study, there had to be some interest, like mutual interest, shared interest.
Well, I mean, you ask a couple questions here, and one of the questions is about this idea that as you grow older, you become more like your parents. And I thought what I was studying had nothing to do with my dad's interest. And as I worked on my master's thesis, and I realized that what I was studying was collaboration, creativity, with Csikszentmihalyi, who's this guy who you would know from flow, the idea of flow. And he had all these interviews, and we were coding the interviews. And the person I was working with, and two other people I was working with, and we coded these interviews, and I ended up coding a part about other people, and it turned out to be a major part of the findings from coding these interviews. It was with big names in creativity and science and in writing, anything that you could say as somebody who had a meaningful impact. So important people, though. And over and over again, their insight, one of the questions was, when did you have your creative insight? And over again, they were cases where they were doing something with other people, or reading a book, or listening to the radio, or taking a course in a new field, or traveling. They were things that were involved with interacting with the external environment, and especially the social environment. And so when I was writing this paper, I was looking up researchers and scholars about creativity and collaboration. And over again, I came in contact with my dad's work, and I didn't expect to. And I realized he had been studying these things in psychology, which I didn't think of him as a psychology research and more at the, it was almost too, that this was even then he wrote this book on on collaborative leadership, and it was so overlapping. And then I can't remember the other examples, but this kept coming up over and over again, that I felt like I didn't feel like, I didn't know my dad had any of these interests. I didn't feel like I was moving in any direction towards what my dad was interested in. And over again, the things I ended up doing as an adult corresponded. And I guess that happens when you grow up with someone, their values rub off and the values are unique. And we have a lot of shared interests that I didn't realize and wouldn't have suspected.
That's an amazing story. Kate, does that surprise you?
About Dad and Will?
Yeah.
I mean, not at all. They're both some of the most interesting thinkers. We've been so lucky. Like, I feel like Will Bennis and Dad and Mom were the most interesting thinkers, like fascinating, creative thinkers, open-minded in a way. Full, I would say all of them have a sense of play. So it's not surprising. It's not surprising. Yeah, and I think for me, I feel like more temperamentally, I've always been like I look like Dad. I would like wake up and I'm like, I have the same friggin' wrinkle that he had that was looked really, different on him. But I feel like just temperamentally and physically, I looked at a picture of us. I recently posted a picture of the two of us. I was like, oh my God, we're like the same exact morphology of the face. So I felt I was kind of like Dad. And I don't know why, that just was, I don't know. I just felt like I was just temperamentally kind of like him. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't feel different.
Yeah.
It's kind of been stable.
But you were a little bit older. So what's the age difference between the two of you? You were a little bit older growing up.
Yeah, 4 years. So John's in the middle. So it's every 2 years.
Okay.
So Will is 4. So I was a bit older, and I had gone off to boarding school when our parents got separated. So I was sort of already out of the house in a strange way. So yeah, I had a different experience of it. And for instance, I would say that I'm from Cincinnati, because we lived there till I was 12. And Will, wouldn't you and John say you're more from Aspen, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I left Cincinnati when I was in third grade, at the end of third grade. And that, I mean, it still could be where I felt like I was from, but Aspen was much more formative years for me.
Yeah.
How many years were you in Aspen, Will?
I was in Aspen for fourth grade through 11th grade. So how many years is that? 8, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And so was your mom primarily raising you there?
Yeah, 8 years.
We're gonna put raising in quotes.
Yeah.
She really believed in raising ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, you asked about our childhood. So my dad was working a lot, and my mom was a very, very hands-off parent. She really believed in that. I think both of them were influenced by Dr. Spock, not the guy from Vulcan, but and the idea in this baby and child care book that was so influential back then was that as long as you love your children, they're going to be okay. I think that was the central theme. And my mom grew up in a pretty strict, and I think pretty unhappy childhood a bit in certain ways, and felt like she wanted to not put that on us. And so she kind of gave us an incredible amount of freedom, too much in some ways for sure, but maybe not, because we all came out, I think, okay. And with a lot of love though. And so we were pretty free range chickens in the house.
And it was the 70s. So like,
yeah.
Sure.
What else would there be?
So were you two, so you spent time, you were growing up together in Cincinnati, and which I want to hit on that first. Kate, you have like very fond memories, it seems, of Cincinnati. Like I've heard you share over the years, just different stories of that. Anything you want to share today?
Oh, actually, this room that I'm sitting in is all like that bed was on the 3rd floor, and some of the people who lived at our house, some of the students stripped it. It was like a teal blue, I remember, and they stripped it down, and I still have that bed, and over here, I don't know if you can see, there's a painting of Mom and Will that's over the mantle. Yeah, I love Cincinnati, and I have dear memories of, and still friendships that I would say Jackie Grupp is just symbolically my best friend. I grew up with
Wow.
her there. I grew up with the Grupp family. I grew up with, Diane Fishbein, who was one of Mom's closest, dearest friends, is still there. And I see her, and I just texted her yesterday because I'm using a picture of her in my next blog post. So,
Wow.
I feel very connected to that. It was a really lovely place to live in the 70s. It was just very warm and exciting.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Diane and I are going to talk. We're going to
Good.
have a
Oh,
conversation.
good.
So I'm looking forward to that.
She's great.
She's great. And the story about Diane is that when we first moved to town, she thought, nobody talks to the wife of the president. And that doesn't seem fair. So I'm going to bake her some cookies. And she came over and introduced herself. And that was it. They were best friends. Yeah.
So they were best friends, Diane and
Yeah. I would know what best friend means to my mom, or anybody, because whatever, but she was, yeah.
But my first best friend was her son, Aaron Fishbein. He was
wow.
certainly so
Mhm.
great.
And her husband was a professor, right? That was
Psychologist.
Okay. So so did you two not see each other for a little while, like when you were away, Kate, and you were in Aspen, Will? Or like
No, we went to Aspen together at the same time.
But then I went to
So-
boarding school. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. How did that, just like, how tell me about life after Cincinnati for the two of you?
So for me, it was that we moved there for my 8th grade year. I went 1 year to the public school in Aspen, and then I went to boarding school.
Okay.
And then for you,
Yeah.
Will, it was kind
So,
of.
and I was in, so the 1 year Kate was there was my 4th grade year, Kate's 8th grade year. And then Kate went to boarding school, but it wasn't very far away, I guess.
Virginia.
Well, I mean,
The
how
first
long
year
were
was
you there?
Madeira.
Right. And then after Madeira, though, you were
right.
at CRMS, right?
Yeah, Colorado Rocky Mountain School. Yeah.
Which is a 40-minute drive from Aspen. So on the weekends you would come home or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we weren't completely separated. I would still see her. And Kate was always a very loving, supportive, sweet older sister. So I was lucky, but she was away a lot. So I did grow up, other than holidays, mostly separate for the years that I feel like I was old enough to know what was going on around me very well. But yeah, so I grew up with my brother and with my mom mostly in Aspen.
And during the 70s, before we we didn't own the house in Cincinnati. Of course, the university owned it. So we bought a house in Aspen because Dad was working summers every summer, really, starting in like maybe 73, Will, do you think?
I don't know
at
what
the
year.
Aspen Institute. So that's why we spent every summer there. So
yeah, I know, like
Neil
has so many good memories from there. Neil Novak. I know, it seems like, and I think Joni probably went out there as well.
Kate just shared a bunch of slides from the 70s, and there's one of Neil in Aspen.
Yeah, and there's a great one of Joni at her wedding, right? And it's and she's winking. She's very mischievous, and she's winking, and she said when Will sent it to her, I sent it to her, and she said, I was winking at your parents because they just walked in and they were late.
She probably loved seeing that. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, Kate, looking at the way in which you have spent your time professionally, I know that like you had done some work in social work. I know a little bit about your career, but just looking at the influence of your parents, the idea that we become more like our parents, has that played out for you?
I mean, as I said, it's more consistent. I feel like at age 7, I wanted to be an actor, and I came from a household of mothers and grandparents and who had all been in the arts. So that was not strange. And Dad loved the theater. Oh my God, he just took me to shows all over. I was very, very lucky to go see A Chorus Line when it first opened, and shows like Cats in England and all these. He loved.
Yeah, I grew up with a sister and a dad who were singing Broadway show tunes all the time, often publicly. And it didn't have the same impact on me, I think, that it had on Kate.
That's so funny. Yeah. I mean, we loved it. We just like sang and whatever. And I did plays at the University of Cincinnati with the Mini Mummers with Kay King, who I adored. And I just did a lot. And I was at the School for Creative and Performing Arts in Cincinnati for a year. I loved that stuff. So that was always consistent. And I got from both sides. It was like, you can be in the arts. That's okay, which is lucky, you know? And I feel that they let me really play it out until I remember putting on my makeup for a performance at the Long Wharf Theater and missing our stepsister's wedding. And I thought, wow, I'm missing real life for this. You know, being an actor is really, you know, you don't get any roots. And I called Dad the next day and he said, you should go to the Smith School for Social Work. I was like, what? Like he knew, it was sort of like bizarre that he knew all about it and knew that it would be the perfect place for me. And he was right. It was the, you know, fastest way for me to get a degree in clinical work, to be a therapist. And it was great. So that also came directly from Dad. It's really interesting. And then, and now I use both of them. I use my clinical work and I also use my theater to do the coaching that I do. So it's more weaving in all the threads together than changing. Does that make sense?
How does that, Will gave us, or you gave us your reaction to Will's professional life. Will, when you look at the work that Kate's done over the years, what does that feel like to you?
Well, I mean, one of the things that you pick up on knowing them both is the charisma or the social intelligence that I think my dad had, especially, you know, I mean, you know, he was earlier on, I think, when he had to worry about having I'm not sure how to put this the right way, but he had incredible social intelligence and a kind of charisma and communicating with people that was amazing. And I think Kate has that. And I think Kate has even more than that because she also does get it from the other side of the family. And my mom's mom was this entertainer in the sense of having meals on a regular basis with these parties with groups of people where she would introduce people to each other and tell stories. And I think that side wasn't the same as our dad's social intelligence, but was really a special kind of way to bring people together. And I, you know, if I go visit my sister, there will be parties with the most interesting, amazing people. And Kate is the host, but she's also the glue in a way that brings out so much appreciation and love and warmth, and it's amazing. And I think that is, you know, if I say, you know, what did my dad share? But another thing I want to say about what Kate had just said was, you know, being an actress and being supported by both her parents. Somewhere in here, one of your questions is about, you know, what is the greatest gift as a parent or something like that. What did your dad do that you appreciate the most? And I think it to me, it's counterintuitive that what I appreciate the most, I think about my dad and my mom, but I know it surprises me more that my dad did this, was that he really loved us and encouraged us unconditionally. He didn't guide us unless we asked for guidance. And I mean, sometimes he would, of course, but he didn't push us. And we were making choices that I think a lot of parents, especially a parent, like he is very acknowledging of growing up in the Depression and feeling like I do not want to be in need, that success is important, especially when he was young. Success was so important. But the path he put us on was to be supportive and to try to help us do what we wanted to do and let us become our own people. And I think we did become three really different people. And you might regret that, but I think my lesson from that was it was the best parenting I could have possibly gotten, because kids need to go through whatever they need to go through and learn on their own mistakes. And to have that support in doing that made a huge difference. And for me, I feel, in retrospect, I don't know how I felt at the time, but in retrospect, I feel so lucky. And when Kate tells the story about being an actor, sorry, I know that's not the correct term for it, but when Kate tells that story, I think that's an example of that. And I know that Kate would never give up having been an actor. but I could imagine so many parents fighting against that rather than supporting it. And I think it's an amazing thing.
No, you're absolutely right. When you think about that, he could have, and mom said at one point, she said, I thought your dad would be a lot more rigid and strict about bringing you guys up, but he wasn't. She kind of she was hoping he would do that. Like, I think
because I'm
one
not
of them
gonna.
would like step in and be like, you gotta study. You gotta go to a good school, you know? But in the end, I feel you're right. It kind of worked out. I mean, again, I blame it on the 70s, but yeah.
That's the default blame card today.
Yeah.
It was the 70s.
It was the 70s.
Did the two of you, even going deeper than like what was the most important thing that your parents taught you? Like, did the two of you get to have conversations with your mom and dad about what they taught you? Like, were those conversations that you were able to have? Like, I'm just curious, Kate, like you said that your mom, like there's just something funny or neat about hearing your mom say like, oh, I thought your dad would have been more strict. Like, were there these kinds of conversations, especially like as they were getting older, about like what they taught you or what was important?
You know what's interesting? I almost feel in a strange way, and I don't know if you felt this, Will, that the role of parent and child was not, they saw us, I think, so completely, knowing we were young and children, but so completely as human beings who were our own thing. And this expectation that they had a lot of, this is strange, but this expectation that they had a lot of influence was only through sort of example and exposure to things. Mom really believed in exposing us to people and places. She believed in travel. They both did, just exposing us to a lot and then allowing us to emerge from that. So it was not really from the point of view of any kind of parenting philosophy, I don't think. Aside from, mom didn't you find that book, The Free Family, that was like,
no.
You did. You found this book. I've got it in here sometime.
Okay, I don't remember.
And it's called, you said, oh, now I know what happened. It's called like The Free Family. And it's given, hold on a second, it's right here. It's so funny. Where is it? Oh, I'll have to find it. Oh gosh, I'll have to find it. It's so funny. And it's signed, by the authors. And you're like, this is what happened. They did kind of believe if you want to teach someone to eat good food, you put lots of stuff out there and let them choose, and they will choose the healthiest thing. That was sort of the guidance.
Well, that was the philosophy.
Yeah, that was
sure that's how it worked in practice. I chose macaroni and cheese or
hold on, I gotta find this book.
frozen dinners because they were tasty and sugar. But I like the philosophy.
Wait,
no, I think our mom too. I don't think she believed she knew how to parent very well, and so that was part of what influenced the philosophy was I'm going to expose them to other great things, to great people, great things. I'll bring in other kind of allo parents who can be parents who I like. And I mean, in some sense, I think that's a great way to parent, but I do think it was partly because she didn't feel confident in her own sense that I know what to do as a parent.
Yeah, she always wanted to have 3 students around because then she thought someone was always going to watch. It was wrong, by the way.
Well, they do say it takes a village to raise.
It does. We had a village.
That's
we for sure had a village.
Really had a village. And the another just outside observation is like there's this great quote that your mom gave to, there was a Sun, it was like the Sun newspaper or something like that in Cincinnati at the time. They gave an interview with her, and there was a quote from her about like what real education meant. And Neil had it in his office for a while, and you probably know the quote better than me, but it was just about how education, the connection between education and dignity, and how education is more than just what you learn in school. It's like how to set up a classroom, how to change a light bulb, how to actually how to fix a dishwasher, things like that. And then, your dad kind of more like the formal education. He got the PhD and wrote the books, so it's interesting to me that like the 3 of you, I mean, John's not here, but the 3 of you, I think this is true of John. I know it's true of the 2 of you, but are entrepreneurs, so you've kind of created your own, found ways to do your own thing in the world, but then you've also
John has his own business as well. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. Or go ahead, Kate. Sorry.
No, that quote, I sent it recently to all the kids in the family because it's on a huge panel. And you're right, she was very interested in education and this idea that sort of the upper classes were not getting real education, because a real education, she feels, is being able to do something in the world, to fix things, to make things. That she felt like, really, you're right, dignity. And she thought all of this, sort of leisure of the upper classes that allows for, whatever, isn't really actually moving the world forward. She was really committed
Absolutely.
to that. Yeah.
I mean, she was, I think, even a little disappointed that we all didn't become like bricklayers and massage therapists and very know-how things that were very valuable. But I wanted to say, I think that sense of valuing experiential education was also clearly a big part of our dad's philosophy and belief. And Antioch, this program they had where every one semester of each school year you would go and do an internship at a company and work, and that was part of the education, and that had a central impact on him. And the experience of being in the Army, and the experience, like a lot of, I think, his biggest experiences that influenced his academic work were actual more practical experiences. So being the president of the university was not an academic job, that was an administrative leadership job, and that changed how he thought of leadership. And going to the Army and these tea groups that he did, which were an academic group of people doing them, but they were very experiential kinds of learning. And I think it's another example of where you're like your parents as you grow up. I didn't feel that consciously. I don't remember having conversations with them about the value. I mean, with our mom, as I was older, because we would joke about it, like she would say, "Come the revolution, you better have a skill." But as without the joking aside, I didn't remember that being a real emphasis of their parenting, that experiential education is so important. But I think it was in terms of their values, and it certainly rubbed off on me. Even though I got a PhD, I still feel like if anybody asks me, that the best education you get is from going out and doing, not from sitting at a desk, reading articles and sitting in a university classroom.
And Dad wrote an article about that, right? About with James O'Toole in the Harvard
Business
School, about how business schools should be more like medical schools. They need to have practicum. You need to actually lead to learn how to lead. It's not theoretical.
Yeah, and I guess it was a criticism of the direction that business schools have gone, which is kind of, publish or perish, and you better have science in it, and you better be a researcher rather than a practitioner, which hadn't always been the case with business schools.
Yeah.
There was a quote from him that we got his papers from USC, and there was a quote in there that I loved, and it said, "Experiential learning is the perfect partner for academic research." And I thought, oh, that's really interesting coming from him, and I feel like that's just related to our conversation today. One other thing before I forget, and the two of you, I think, will appreciate this. I had the chance. We were at a wedding at MIT in Boston, like in 2018 or 2019, and it was for one of my relatives, and their grandfather was a longtime professor at MIT, and he went to the tea group meetings that your dad held in Maine. And it was like, what? I mean, he was in his 90s, but he's like, oh yeah, Dr. Bennis invited me to go. And I mean, I can't recall all of the memories that he had from going, but he was there, and it was just surreal to
That's so cool. Like this is a kind of strand that I kind of, looking back, I'm kind of making this up a little bit. Will, you can, but the idea is that people who fought in World War II, and especially he was Jewish, he thought, how could this happen? Like, how could a whole country think this was okay? What happened? So I think that's what started people thinking about leadership. Is it group dynamic? I think they started with group dynamics, which is the T groups, right? What happens in a group? Who emerges as a leader? So the T groups would come together, they'd bring people together, and they'd just see what happened, right? There was no leader, there was no facilitator, right? Is that how I think that's how they worked, right? And they would just,
in a way, but yeah.
And then they would they would have this experience, and then they would talk about it afterwards. Is that right? And see what happened.
Well, I mean, it's sort of, my understanding of it is, these almost not laboratory, but experimental studies basically to look at group dynamics as they unfold. So they tried a lot of different things, but and it was a group of, our dad wasn't the T group man. He was a young scholar who got to go along and be part of it because his mentors were deeply involved with it. And it was like people like Abraham Maslow was there. And I mean, these really all
Maslow's the
humanistic.
one who gave them the book, The Free Family.
Oh, right. Great. Carl Rogers, the humanist, person-centered psychologist. All these humanistic psychologists were the people involved in that, kind of hippies of the academic world who were getting together, idealistic, and let's look at how people actually behave in groups. We can study this by getting in the field, by creating this field, and put people in these awkward kind of problems where they have to coordinate as a group, and we'll be there and watch and maybe poke in certain ways and see what they do, which just, I think it was a profound experience for all the people involved. My feeling is it had a huge impact on our dad's success, and in the sense that I think he developed a lot of skills for working with people and reading people and interacting with groups that I think came out of the lessons learned from these T groups and coordinating with a group of people who have different interests and are sometimes conflicting. And if I think the thing I value, there's a lot of things I don't love about when I read my dad's books. There's things I don't love, but one of the things I think that is missing somewhat today, and a lot of the dialogue about polarization going on is trying to, are a lot of arguments about the irrationality of the other side, or about, if people could just be reasonable and look at the evidence and look at the arguments, then we could. And what the problem is people are not getting the same evidence that we're getting because of social networks or whatever. But, I think at the University of Cincinnati as an example, and at the time, he left not super popular with a lot of the people in charge and not happy. And it was at a time when the students were protesting against the teachers, that they were, he came from Buffalo where that was happening, but in Cincinnati too, there was a lot of conflict between the administration and the students. And this is my interpretation, or a child's view, and then trying to put it back together as an adult. But my sense is he would actively reach out to the students and really listen and authentically try to figure out, well, what's going on. I think that a lot of that was influenced not just by the T groups, but by the people who were involved, like Carl Rogers. This idea of active listening would really go out to the people in the fringes from the administration side, the students. The administration was like, why are you listening to the students? This is my sense of it. We're the ones who know what's going on. They're kids, and the kids are protesting, and look at how, from the administration point of view, they need to be put in their place. They're out of control. And here was this president of the university saying, we need to be listening to them. So he had trust from the students in a way I think a lot of the administration didn't have. And I think that idea of leadership, leadership that embraces diversity for specific reasons, that embraces really reaching out to the people who are at the hierarchical lower end of an organization, I think all come from that. And I think, at least from a moral perspective, it's refreshing and important. And anyway.
I love dissecting your dad.
Those breakfasts. What were the breakfasts, Jack, that he had? Because you told me about this.
Oh, he would have like, well, I think, are these like the early morning meetings?
Yeah.
Like, I guess it got to a point or something like that where meetings at the university, like nobody could meet at 7 or 8 in the morning. So he's like, well, we're going to have breakfast at 5 a.m. And
I thought, wasn't there something like open office hours? Like,
he did have open office hours, I think, for like the first couple years of being president. Yeah,
and anybody could come.
Yeah.
I think another thing I just want to throw out there that I only know now, looking back, is that neither of our parents talked a lot about, explicitly about certain political things. They took action.
Okay.
Who they invited into our house, who they honored with honorary degrees. I mean, I was just looking, here's one. It says, Kate, I went into detail about honorary degrees because I felt especially good about these two. Shirley Chisholm, for example, the first Black woman ever elected to Congress. And you know what I mean? These are the people that he chose he shook up the board. The way that our parents would kind of reach out into the world and bring diversity in from all over the world, all ages, all type, it was kind of an amazing, lucky thing for us.
And absolutely, without talking about it, is such an important point, because they really didn't lecture or say this is what you should believe. And I think they must have both had that as a really deep value, that you need to learn what you believe on yourself. Because I try to tell my kids what they should believe, but I really value that they didn't, and that
they just did it. They just did the right thing, right? They just did it.
Yeah.
They just took action, The only kind of more political thing I remember Dad saying to me was, he said, we'll know that there's equality in the genders when there are as many mediocre women in office as there are mediocre men. That was like the closest he got to anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like he cared a lot about I interviewed Bruce Jackson, Kate, and it was a great time. I will have to send you both the audio of it. But
absolutely, he's a character.
Did you have to bleep a lot?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was actually shocking. This you will see this in the interview, but he picks up the Zoom call, and the moment he picks up the Zoom call, he's getting a phone call from his attorney, who is one of his children, because I can't make this up. Johnny Depp was suing him.
Wait, is suing Bruce?
Yes. because Johnny Depp, for some album he came out with just recently, used some of Bruce's work and didn't cite him for it. So it was.
So wouldn't Bruce be suing Johnny Depp then, rather than Johnny Depp be suing Bruce?
I think what happened was Bruce had reached out, and maybe Bruce had filed something, but then Johnny Depp came back and was like, no, I'm going to sue you for more.
Oh my God.
Something like, I don't know. Anyways, but the reason I brought up Bruce was that Bruce said, Warren thought that a key to solving the problems in the Middle East were closely tied to women's rights.
Oh yeah.
And so it seemed like, your dad cared about, obviously doing the right thing and moral leadership, but just interesting to hear you talk about like women in power. And I know that's a theme that Tom Peters has mentioned in some of our conversations with him. So
Dad did say to me, I remember long ago, he said, you can tell if a country is healthy by looking at how they treat their women and their daughters, they educating them. That he thought was really a sign of what is important in a society.
So I just want to pause us here. I know it's 1:02, and we have the communications expert on the line, and ending meetings on time is I understand an important part of communications. So we could add on a little bit more time. I don't know what your schedules are, or we could just do a second part of this. I don't want to rush. I don't want to rush the rest of it. I feel like there's probably a little bit more that we could cover, like just talking about more of the time in Cincinnati and your dad's actual work itself. And so I don't know what you're comfortable with, but I don't know if there's more.
I mean, I could stay on for another few minutes, and I definitely want to read you some stuff later. I really think it's so incredible.
Yeah, we can set like a part. I know some podcasts do like part 1 and part 2. We could do a part 2 if you're interested.
I'd rather stay for a few minutes and try not to be too rushed, and rather than try to schedule another podcast, not because I don't enjoy talking, but I think especially right now things are pretty hectic.
Okay.
easier to, right now is a good time for me if it's okay with you, Kate, and with you,
that's
Jack.
good.
So since we're pausing, here are my thoughts. This is your story to tell. So, I maybe want to talk a little bit more about just your dad's work itself, like what's important, what does the next generation need to know? And I think you started to hit on that, Will, and I think we've been hitting on that. What would the word be? Implicitly.
Peripherally.
Yeah, preferably. And then maybe talk about like the work that's happening at UC. Like, I just really am so curious how it feels to have people like probably reaching out to you with some regularity of like your dad, or like we want to do like, like just what is that like for an entire university to say we want to build an institute in his name? I don't know, maybe I'd word the question differently. What do you want to share that we haven't talked about?
Well, I mean, Will, do you want to?
There's I'm not sure I have anything that I feel strongly about to say. It's strange growing up with, I mean, in a lot of ways, our dad isn't famous at all. If you're outside of this particular world, people don't know who he is. I don't feel like I grew up with a star. If we're walking down the street, generally people wouldn't say, "Oh, you're Warren Bennis." It's not like that at all, obviously.
Yeah.
But when you're in a certain world, he's kind of famous, or he was, and that as a, there's a certain ambivalence, I think, with anybody who grows up kind of in a certain kind of limelight, where you want to be sure you're being treated the way you are because of who you are, not because of where you are or who you're with or whatever. And so there's, I think, a challenging thing, especially in the business world or whatever, is trying to figure out as an individual how to navigate that, because there's a lot of, I think, any parents want their kids to get ahead, and as navigating the world is a social world where everything is about connections and relationships. And there's, at least for me personally, talking about what it's like growing up anyway with our dad is this real ambivalence of, how do you navigate that? Like, do you pretend like he's not your dad, or do you say, how can I build relationships with people in that world? And I don't know, so even the podcast, to the extent this is going to be public, I feel a lot of ambivalence, because it's a very personal thing having your dad. And it's also, everything I say is a public thing in some sense. And so our dad, I think, was very, very smart and conscious of the importance of what you say and interacting with people. And I don't have that. I think I reacted against that in a strong way as a kid, where I was almost angry about any performative act. And I, to the very self-sabotaging extent, where I would just say stupid things in public because I was trying not to worry about what other people thought, or I wouldn't worry about how I dressed, or I just, I think, this is not a very coherent thought, but it's sort of this, for me, the challenge side of growing up with our dad, I guess, to say a little bit about that, because I think it's sort of important to think about that too, or the, one of the hard things about a conversation like this. And I feel so lucky to have had both of my parents. My mom and dad were amazing. I love them. They were unconditionally loving. Neither of them did anything, in my view, that was knowingly hurtful to their children in any way, or to other people in their environment. So I just want to preface it by that. But having said that, it's a weird context for me to do a podcast, because it feels to me like I even a couple things I've said kind of sarcastically a little bit in the podcast, I feel bad about having said, and I want to strike from the record because I don't want any public record of negative things. But having said that, I also feel like, well, then this is a fake podcast. I feel like this, at our parents' memorials, I sort of wanted to say some of the dirt because it felt like you're not representing the whole person if you don't also say the things that were kind of their foibles or the things that were hurtful as parents or whatever. So there isn't a lot to say. I'm making it sound like there's these skeletons in the closet that there really aren't. But at the same time, I'm just sharing it because it's a strange situation, I think, to do a podcast about your parents. And every time I see anybody in the public eye talking about family or relatives, there is this, it's public, it's not the real thing. And I don't know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think one thought is that we don't have to publish this, like really. I mean, I think it's just important to capture the stories, and to have it on just to have it on record. I think it informs the public work. Let's say that, like if people are going to, if Donna Crobot Mason is going to be the academic director and create programs in your dad's name, or, I think we wanted to have the conversation with the both of you because it seemed like, well, if we're asking people to tell us the stories about Warren and Clary Bennis, we should talk to their kids, so I didn't really know either of your parents that well, but I feel like I know them spiritually. I care about your parents. I care deeply about them, I feel them in my life. So it's an honor to do the interview. It's an honor to have the conversation with you. So yeah, it's certainly not something we have to publish. I think you just wanted to kind of have a conversation for the record.
Right.
So
I really appreciate what you said. And in general, part of the reason I was happy to do this is because I feel the authentic caring that you have, and the passion about the whole project that is meaningful and great to see. And you should know that it's appreciated.
No, thank you, Will. Kate, I don't know where that leaves us, but I know you only had a couple minutes. Any reaction to that or anything else you want to share maybe about?
We do have different experiences. For me, I'm unambivalent.
Yeah.
I feel like I feel, of course, like all parents, especially me, are totally flawed and make mistakes constantly. So I don't have a deep roiling sense of ambivalence about Dad's work in the world at all. It seems to me of who he was. So for me, how I see it is that who he was in the world was so integrated because our house was even permeable in that way. Our household, our growing up, there was no distinction between work and life, and mom and dad kind of worked together seamlessly like that too. So friends were colleagues, were students, were, living with us, were working with my dad, and so for me, that's how I experienced dad and mom was kind of I didn't see that sense of public-private at all. Okay. That it was much more kind of an integrated sense of, for me, who he was. And so when I look when he got older, he really was thinking a lot about legacy. And I think that's important to know if I left anything. And there was, for me, this sense, as Will said, when he left Cincinnati, he did not feel beloved. And when I went to the incredible service that the University of Cincinnati gave for him after his death, I was so moved because it was all these people spoke about how important he'd been, and he didn't know that, and how much credit they gave to his presidency in terms of saving the university and turning it into this really flourishing direction. And I was sad that he never knew that. I was just so sad that he never knew that.
But he did. I mean, they gave him the honorary degree when he was
Mhm.
still alive, and he was there for that, and he
He
saw that
was.
then.
He was. That I was there at the honorary degree, and I
Me
still
too.
didn't
Me
get it
too.
until after he died. Like for
Uh-huh.
me, the experience of being at the honorary degree was sort of like, yeah, Tom Humes, who had been very close to Dad when Dad was a president as a student. He had just graduated. He was 24, and he, was hired by Dad to kind of make a sales pitch for why the university should join the state system. And he was then the chairman of the board many years later, and invited Dad, had heard that Dad was never invited and invited him. And I think Dad thought, oh, this is good, but it really wasn't until I heard all the students speak who they put up a microphone in the dinner, and all these people who are now in their 60s spoke about their experiences with Dad, driving him around or coming to meetings or parties or being included in everything. And how they said, we were like Midwestern kids. We'd never met anybody like this. It was so wild for us. And that's when it really clicked for me that I thought, wow, this is really, this is different than, I'd saw it as a kid from the inside. I didn't see it from the outside. And it was something I wish that Dad had known, I wish I'd really known it deep in his core. So that's why for me, I do feel connected to Cincinnati. I do feel like my formative years were spent there. I do feel that there is something about being personally not on the coasts and in this more elitist educational sphere, and being in this university town that is doing great things for people in allowing the broadest group of people to get an education and have access to it, which is so connected to what I believe Dad really wanted, being himself a GI Bill student, and the co-op program that UC has. So for me, I think this is me hoping and just, for me, I want his work in Cincinnati. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what he would have wanted. Who knows? But I personally think that it's extraordinary. And I feel that our country is lacking leadership. And I feel that if you're going to do leadership, you want to hit the most people as possible. So to have a massive, incredibly inclusive undergraduate population who are going to have the chance to really think about each and every one of them as a leader. And how can we go out and do this work in the same way that Mom wanted people to do things, right? And Dad wanted people to experience things, is really powerful. So I don't know. I just feel like as a legacy. And he said to me once, he said, I was not a good leader, but I really was a good teacher. Like he loved education. He really loved education. That's where he came alive, was in front of the classroom with students. So to me, it feels very of a whole and a great place for his work.
There's a question I really wanted to ask you today, and it was that picture that you posted on LinkedIn. It was like from behind him at the commencement ceremony. Did you take that, Kate?
I did, and it was at his. That was at the honorary degree.
And there's the story you've said in a couple different interviews or recorded conversations that he said more in 2 minutes in favor of UC becoming a full state university than all of the politicians could in their hundreds of pages of documents. Do you know what he said?
No, so I kind of paraphrased it. I heard that, and it's in a blog post I wrote, because I heard that at that memorial service, somebody got up who had driven him to that and told that story. And I don't remember if the person's out there listening, or if you're going to be listening, who was that? Because it was one of his now in the 60s man who at the time had been a student and drove Dad, and he told that story. And so I kind of paraphrase it in there. And I say a student, I didn't have his name, so I can add that in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last question for me, and then if you have anything else, either of you, there is an institute being built in your dad's name. I actually wonder if it should be in your dad and your mom's name. So maybe you can comment on that. A quick story to illustrate the question. We were at a conference in Washington, D.C. You were there, Kate. And after the conference, one of the students emailed me. This student is involved in the planning around your dad's legacy and carrying on his work through the Warren Bennis leadership experience. He emailed me after the conference and he said, I was thinking about my experience at the conference in DC, just leadership. What am I going to do? And he said, the week I got back, I called my high school and I started a leadership scholarship.
Wow.
And it was only he said, it was only $250, but I got it started. And, and I'm just sitting there reading it and I'm thinking that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's just amazing, the ripple. And to me, that story is sort of in the nonprofit world, they call it a mission moment, sort of that's, I feel like these efforts at their best. And I just wonder from the two of you, it's awesome to hear you say, Kate, you want your dad's work in Cincinnati. But I'm curious, just from what the two of you know about the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute, what are your hopes for it? What do you want to see from that effort?
So, I mean, I'm going to jump in. Is that okay, Will?
Yeah, sure.
So for me, I think that it's the undergraduate leadership as young as possible, giving people the tools and the skills to do things, to take action. And Dad said something about great leaders have a bias towards action. And that student who emailed you took action. I mean, that is amazing. How many times do we not take action because we think we don't have the resources or we don't have the connections or we don't have the education yet to say right now, you can do something. And I quoted something at that conference that I love. It's from a dear friend of Dad's, Charles Handy, who was a student of Dad's at MIT and dear friend. And he was writing a book for his grandchildren. And I said, what is it about? And he said, I want them to do what they do best, to the best of their ability, for the good of others. And it's that last line that I think is really integrated into Dad's whole idea of leadership, is that if it is not for the good of others, if it is for self-gain, it's not leadership. So I really feel like everything he did, and then when he thought he was not capable of it or couldn't do it well, like being a leader, he would leave. Right? Yeah.
No,
So
I
that
love that.
piece of it is really important to me to have incorporated into leadership. And Dad's going to be upset because he's going to be like, Charles Handy got the last word, but really I think it was played out in everything he said and did about leadership, is that it is for the good of others.
That's great. No, I guess I don't have much to add, and I couldn't add it as eloquently, but I think to try to add something is I guess I already said it a little, or maybe Kate already said it a little, but the importance of listening and really listening broadly. And there's this idea of democratic leadership or non-hierarchical leadership, the idea that the everybody in an organization, and organizations right now are still very hierarchical, but really the people at the lowest end of the hierarchy often have the most insight because they're on the ground, they're in the field. And that aspect of experiential education, of going out and doing an internship and working and valuing the people who are really not at the top, but at the bottom. And I'm not even comfortable saying at the bottom because that makes it sound like they're less. And I don't think that's right. But the people who are on the ground, as a form of leadership, and I guess it's part of, some of my ambivalence. I can't talk about things without being ambivalent, so that's just Will. But is the emphasis on leadership, to me, feels almost like it's the wrong emphasis, because so much of that is followership, or is, you can't be a leader without a whole group, and if everybody's trying to be a leader, things don't work that well. And I feel like, is there a field or a name for something that isn't really about everybody becoming the ones in charge, because it feels so Western and so American in ways, I love America, I love the West, but there are things about that everybody should be great in a in charge sort of way that I feel like is missing something. And I don't know what that says, but I sort of think in a certain way a lot of our dad's philosophy of leadership sort of suggests that anyway. And I don't know how to integrate that in a center for leadership, but
so I love that so much, Will. And so Dad, as you know, loved, like, he felt like Shakespeare was the best author on leadership ever. And but I think Dad did talk about followership at some point. And I was just going back to Shakespeare, as Dad would have, to write notes to somebody who's a leader, but he's not listening. And that piece about the listening, Will, you're right. It's so profound, and it's got to be baked in. He's like, well, I always say, do you have any questions? I'm like, no. The shyest, most introverted person in the room has got to feel heard and completely invited. Like, how do you create that? How do you create that? And I was thinking about, and I was quoting from Shakespeare, because I was thinking about, there's this great, in Henry V, there's this great scene at the St. Crispin's Day, it's before the We Band of Brothers, but it's like, come on. I know you guys are scared, but this is going to be fine. But the night before, Henry V has put on a disguise and listened in to the conversations around the campfires about the fear. And without that listening in, you wouldn't have had the St. Crispin's Day. It wouldn't have worked. He could have given that speech, but nobody would have followed him, right? So that piece about the listening is so important. And how do we teach that to leaders? Like, really,
and as you said, really listening, because it is more than just being heard. It's the trust that happens only when you trust the person really cares about what you have to say.
Yeah. Right.
Wow. I mean, I feel like that to me is one of the more profound aspects that I think our dad really believed and really lived in a certain way, especially before he was famous enough that it went to his head. When he was younger, but it really, I think, is essential. And I mean, it goes back to, I think, the people he was hanging around with and the experiences he had with T groups. They were all humanistic psychologists who believed profoundly in the value of listening.
Yeah. This is Kate Bennis, daughter of Warren Bennis, and I'm reading excerpts, or a lot of, actually, a book that he wrote called For Kate on Her 13th Birthday. And he wrote it when we were living in Cincinnati, and then a lot of it has to do with his work at UC, and that's the part that I'm going to be reading. I'm starting kind of in the middle. I'm skipping my babyhood in India and Buffalo. He wrote this book based on the idea that Nehru wrote a book for his daughter when he was in prison. And this is sort of Dad's take on that. And he's really just telling me about his life. So the audience is a 12/13-year-old girl. You can learn all about me, or as much as I know myself and want to tell you. I cannot tell you everything, because I don't know everything about myself. And I'm not at all sure that I want you to know everything that I do know about myself, even if I did know everything. Which I don't. But then think about it. You know things about me that I don't know, like how I look and sound when I'm tired or happy or bored or angry or indifferent, or what I think about you and your brothers, and what else. I bet you know more about me that you won't tell me than I know about myself and won't tell you. I'll give you odds on that. I mean, I'll give you 50 cents to your quarter that what I said is true. Want to? Never mind. What I do know about myself and my life is that it very often seems to be in a state of perpetual motion. My work seems to do that for me. It keeps me churning and racing, and often, too often, I fear, my work puts a distance between us. I wonder sometimes, Kate, if it's the other way around, whether I choose jobs that kind of make me too busy. Do you think that's possible? For example, I just mentioned Mitchell Rose. So in the previous part, he talks about running into Mitchell Rose, who was a dancer and choreographer living at our house. I just mentioned Mitchell Rose. Well, last night around midnight, we began to eat at the kitchen table, watching TV and aimlessly talking like two people who had known each other over the years and were sort of prattling without purpose, as if it made no difference whether the other was listening or not. Chatter, chatter, nice and comfortable. Skipping back and forth from the food, my usual, 2 melted ham and cheese sandwiches with tomatoes and a cloud of pepper, plus a half gallon or so of orange juice. Mitchell was nibbling on something that looked like a vegetable garden sprouting out of an empty yogurt cup. He told me that Edna Ora, who was also living with us from Israel, had asked him yesterday if he knew, quote, whether Warren knew what Mitchell was doing in our house. Then she giggled, Mitchell said. Now, what was funny about that, he wondered. I guess what was funny about that, I told him, is that our house had been occupied over the past year or so, and for years going back to Buffalo, with one Israeli, Edna, looking for a job ever since she moved in, 2 students at the university, a friend of your grandmother's, Sarah from Cleveland, who was looking for a job with your mother's help in arts administration, Bruce Hopple, a holdover from 2 years before who was going to move out about a year and a half ago but never got around to it, 3 other members from the same dance troupe as Mitchell's, 2 ladies and 1 lord from England, 7 women filmmakers, 47 guest speakers, ranging from Northern Ireland's ombudsman to a former director of the Santa Fe Museum, and refugees from all over the world who use our home the way CIA uses safe houses, as a haven for super clever and penniless who sing for their supper. Our old Victorian house reminds me more of an adult dormitory, very loosely organized, than it does a place where a family is supposed to live. Your mother is clearly the social architect, and everyone seems to exist in order to make space for the others. It's also a place where people emerge suddenly in the dead of night, wearing a backpack over their shoulders like Françoise from Paris, Michel Crozier's daughter, splitting the mist in 2 as she stood on our porch at 2 a.m. in jeans, and leaving exactly the same way. Days and bodies dance by, and I don't even get to recognize their silhouettes or find out why they are there or when they go. The fact is that I did know what Mitchell Rose was doing in our house. I was told that he was giving a master class at the Contemporary Dance Theater, and that if he stayed at our house and could get room and board for free, he could stay much longer than if the Contemporary Dance Theater had to foot the bill, and it was an expensive hotel. When I asked your mother how long Mitchell was going to stay with us, curious only because he was on the 3rd floor, and which, as you know, is right next to my office and is only slightly inconvenient for me, she said as long as it was okay with me. Who knows? Mitchell may stay with us for a long time. He might even start to give master classes to our tenants. He might even forget to leave, ever. Or he might leave his room empty for good, except for a worn-out tights in the corner, a relic of our house of dancing bodies. Mitchell laughed about Edna's question and then wondered if it would be possible for some total stranger to join our household, share our meals, lay out a sleeping bag in the living room or the library on the 1st floor, as well as use the bathroom off the kitchen and stay a week or longer without anyone even questioning them. I told him that was altogether possible, and that it's just possible that Jonathan, who is right now sleeping in his what his dad calls a pouch bag in the library, is a total stranger. But then so was he. And the long and short of it is that is our life with people. And that's what most of my work is all about too, Kate. In case you wanted to know what I do inside my mysterious office, my life there is with people too. Just more of them, lots more. Oh, there are formal appointments and an unending series of telephone calls, but it's really more of the same, though less casual. More people with purpose, with agendas and needs and ideas and projects, wanting me most of the time to see how they could get the university or me to do something about their agendas and needs and ideas and projects and their ripe but unpicked lives. It's basically what I do, seeing people who are auditioning for a chance at life, seeing people who hold fast to their dreams. And that's what I love. Like when I'm able to help someone really find themselves or encourage another to write an article and then see that person who never had the confidence to write before get published in the Atlantic Monthly, or help a student get accepted to law school, or find a job for Rob Ayers, remember he lived with us, his sociology instructor in New York City, so that he can join his bride of 2 weeks who had just taken a job there, or find someone a cheap apartment in Beverly Hills for the summer, or permit 3 architecture students and 2 design instructors to use our Aspen house so that they can attend a big design conference there, or tell an old friend who came to the university with me And he was very excited about a book he wants to publish, his first book. And one's first book is always like having a first child. It's very special. And I want to help him get it published with a big name, a big publisher, compared with the publisher he's thinking of signing with, a small firm with no distinction as yet, except its Cambridge address, 17 Dunster Street, not bad. Or talk with Ellen about her week in Chicago when she joined a group where everyone was really honest with each other, directly right to their face, to tell each other exactly what they really and truly thought. And she wanted me to know how grateful she was for the sprouting buds of life she was feeling, like tingling, like needles shooting through her, like some part of her emotional self was asleep for too many years and wanting me to see and touch the ginger ale of her new life. I could go on, I love it all. Being helpful, generating new possibilities and options for people, and feeling sometimes, but only to myself, not like a university president, whatever that feels like. And to watch their talents and inner resources slowly emerge, like a big air balloon being slowly inflated until it soars up, 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 and up. I really enjoy that. And I spend a lot of time on the phone and with people. Piece here is about his secretaries. Two women, more or less, run my life. I mean, without them, I don't know how I could properly do my job. You know who I'm talking about, Eve and Arlene. As far as your brothers are concerned, they are the dispensers of goodies. For me, they are dispensers of good sense and judgment. They also balance my checkbooks, make hotel and airline reservations, type very important and usually confidential letters, keep all those people who want appointments with me now relatively happy, even when they are referred to someone else or have to wait sometimes as long as several months before my calendar clears for an appointment. They make hundreds of phone calls for me and defer or refer maybe thousands. They make sure my office budget is never overspent, keep me from making too many commitments, batten down the hatches when my office is used as an arena for protest groups, and try to get me to slow down so that I can maintain my health, sanity, and some semblance of family life. They are my bodyguards, my conscience, my angels, my tickets to an opening in New York City, my contact with reality. They do a lot of other things on my behalf too, some that I'm not sure I always appreciate or even know about. I have enormous trust and respect for them and a good deal of affection. At times, I almost believe that they are part of my office family. I certainly see more of them than I do of you or your brothers or even your mother. And like my, quote, home family, I feel that I can never show them the sufficient love and gratitude for taking me just as I am, warts and all, with such consistent devotion and good humor. Arlene is the one who manages the most important part of my life, the calendar. She is responsible for this. That's my calendar for a month in May 1975. Arlene is responsible for this the same way a zookeeper is responsible for taming his animals, a continual struggle against my tendency to jump over the gates of safety, against my tendency to do too much. May 1975 is not especially different from any other month, except when we're in Aspen. My calendar for May 1977 looks pretty much like this one, except that I can probably understand it a little bit better. At least I hope I can understand it better, as this one requires a code book to understand. The first thing you can probably detect is that, aside from weekends and holidays, there is only one evening that month where there's a chance for me to come home and have dinner with the family. It's May 13th. As it turns out, I didn't, because some old friends from out of town unexpectedly dropped in on us and we went out for dinner with them downtown. As I reflect on the activities I engaged in that month, and past Aprils, Marches, Septembers, and so forth, most of them were things I really wanted to do. Most, but not all. I didn't, for example, particularly look forward to attending the large banquet on May 5th. And now that I think about it, I didn't go. I didn't go because the only time I would have to be with you and celebrate your 11th birthday was that evening, 2 days after your birthday. We all had dinner together that night, didn't we? I think that's what we did, because we were invited to the real day of your birthday to the Kentucky Derby by an old friend, Jim Miller, who is the president of University of Louisville and who has a special box at that event. Neither your mother nor I had ever been to the Kentucky Derby before, and I really wanted to go. Mom wasn't that eager to see the Kentucky Derby, I believe that's true, but felt that the 2-hour drive to Louisville would give us the only time that month to be together. I mean, just the two of us, alone. So she thought, why not? She figured out that was the only time we ever seem to have together is when we drive somewhere, usually to some university type affair or related anyway to university business. It's a paltry amount of time, really, though she also discovered that the average married couple spent only 27 minutes together per day. That's not paltry, that's criminal. I can hardly make out what the various evening activities consisted of, but it looks as if I attended a dinner with students at Daniels Hall with your mother, quote CB in the calendar, on May 6th, gave a speech to a group of alumni on May 7th about the importance of voting for UC going state, ballot number 10, yes, ballot number 11, yes, walked over to Tangeman University Center without time for dinner to hear the outgoing student body president and vice president give speeches, at which time they reviewed their year's achievements, attended a dinner for all those people, most of them not members of our regular faculty, who gave their time and energy to teach at our alumni college on May 8th, attended a dinner for the talented pianist and conductor Leon Fleischer on May 9th. I really looked forward to meeting Mr. Fleischer because I had tried unsuccessfully to persuade him to become dean of the College Conservatory of Music. He was interesting to me for more reasons than that, though, not the least of which was his determination to continue playing the piano, despite the fact that for some mysterious reason his right hand became paralyzed at the height of his career as a concert pianist. He just played music that was written only for the left hand. And then when he ran out of music of that sort, some of which was composed especially for him, he began to take lessons on conducting, which he could do with only one hand, so long as someone turned the pages for him. I was impressed with what I'd known about him, and impressed with his determination and commitment and courage. And then I got to know him a bit better on the telephone as we had long talks practically every Sunday morning for at least a month. The first 2 times we talked, I tried to convince him to leave Baltimore, where he was teaching and studying. The last 2 times we talked, he helped me identify other talented people who would make, he was certain, excellent deans. As it turned out, the party was too large and I was too shy. And when I did have a chance to speak with him so that I could tell him of my admiration, we did talk, but it was all very polite and restrained, typical dinner party trivia. At that time, I made a pledge. I vowed never to waste my or anyone else's time. That is, I resolved, then and there, never to lose an opportunity to tell someone why I admired them or why they were admired. Famous people, strangely, rarely hear anyone tell them things like that, and they need to be told every once in a while. It keeps them going. Well, I don't want to bore you with too many other details about my evenings of May 1975, except for 2 honorary degrees I awarded that month. One to a Black Congresswoman, Shirley Chisholm of New York, and one to Eleanor McAbee, a child psychologist who heads what is probably the best psychology department in the country, the one at Stanford University. I don't know if you know this, Kate, but almost all universities award honorary degrees on one and only one occasion during the commencement exercises. At that time, the president reads off a citation, usually very stiff and formal, before a very large crowd of people, mostly parents and friends of the graduates, under a hot June sun. And then one by one, each of the honorees stands up while someone puts a hood over their head or shoulders. Usually about 6 or 7 are given on that occasion. For most everyone, including the honoree, it's a total bore, if not a waste of time. 99% of the audience never heard of the honorees and couldn't care less. They, their sons and daughters, wives or husbands, friends, and so forth, are all distracted during the presentation of the honorary degree and reminded of their boredom by the runs of perspiration. They silently long for the one thing they came to see, their loved one getting his or her degree. Remember, graduations, bar mitzvahs, even wedding plans seem not to be for those honored, but for their proud parents. They've been waiting and paying for 4 years at least for that, damn it, and those distinguished people never, whoever they are delaying that magical moment for everyone. I decided not to change that custom when I first came to UC, but then I decided to invite each distinguished person to our campus for at least a day or 2 to really honor them. They didn't like those rituals any more than the audience did. I also wanted our campus to profit from their presence too, to really use them. For example, when the pianist Van Cliburn received his honorary degree from UC, he gave a recital at Corbett, taught a masterclass, and gave a public lecture just before receiving his degree. By the way, here's a bit of gossip about Van Cliburn and his degree. When I invited him to accept the degree, I learned that his mother graduated from CCM, and he tried to persuade me to give an honorary degree to her too. While I was charmed by his love and respect for his mother, I really couldn't do that because honorary degrees are usually given to people who accomplish something very important and who are recognized for their contributions. Van Cliburn himself, for example, was the first American ever to win the Tchaikovsky Prize at Leningrad in the Soviet Union. a most coveted award, which is the greatest honor any young, under 30 pianist can ever win. At the time he won it, it was especially important, for our national honor was, or seemed to be, at stake. The Russians had launched the first unmanned missile into space, and our pride had been seriously injured by their triumph. When he won the piano competition, we were still licking our mortal wounds. In a way, Van was as much a national hero as John Glenn or Neil Armstrong in their day. His victory at the keyboard took on a national significance reserved only for war heroes. Well, anyway, Van is inordinately fond of his mom and felt that his own success was her doing. She had been his first teacher, and through her, he told me he learned to love the love and discipline so necessary to become a great pianist, or I would add, a great anything. As you can see, I presented Representative Shirley Chisholm and Eleanor Maccabee with honorary degrees that month, and both sang for their supper, so to speak, beautifully at that. Each gave talks to large audiences. Ms. Chisholm on her legislative experience and her unsuccessful attempt to be the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, and another talk to many of the women's groups on the UC campus. Dr. Maccabee, a very distinguished child psychologist, had just returned from China before she came to our campus. Her most recent book had just appeared on some of the psychological differences between boys and girls, very young boys and girls from birth to age 3. The book was widely acclaimed, and for the years of work that went into it, she received many awards. Her trip to China was the very first that anyone had made to that important nation, that is, any person from a Western country, in order to study children of China. She brought slides with her and reported on the many differences in the upbringing of Chinese children as compared to American children. She also spoke to various groups on campus, most especially the psychology department, who originally proposed her for the honorary degree. Kate, I went into this detail about honorary degrees because I felt especially good about these two. Shirley Chisholm, for example, was the first Black woman ever elected to Congress, and she had turned out to be one of the very best legislators in Congress, most especially when it came to the rights of various minority groups or any group that had been deprived, left out, ignored by our government, and in need of attention and help. She weighs about the same as you do, perhaps less, but has a voice that sounds like a full chorus. She's a great speaker with beautiful delivery. When the newspapers and TV reported that she was to receive an honorary degree, I received a number of really dumb and nasty phone calls about my judgment. One telephone caller said he was going to bomb Wilson Auditorium, where she gave one of her speeches, if she was, quote, allowed to receive the degree. Eleanor Maccabee was someone I'd known for a long time, a really long time. In fact, I'd known her back in Boston when I was a graduate student at MIT. She was well known even back then for her research on children, especially her studies which compared children cross-culturally, i.e. comparing various aspects of families, child-rearing practices from one country to another. Her husband, Nathan, was also someone I'd known for a long time. In fact, after I received my doctorate from MIT and had taught there for a year, I took my first real job teaching at Boston University. Nathan Maccabee, he's never called anything but Mac, was my department head, my first real boss, and I am forever grateful to him for teaching me psychology. He did this very cleverly, I now realize, by asking me to teach a course with him, the basic psychology course that all first-year graduate students have to take, a required course, just like the ones, for example, you have to take at Walnut Hills. I was really scared because my doctorate at MIT was in economics and social science, a hybrid degree which made the fundamentals of advanced psychological theory somewhat out of my range of competence. So I agreed to teach it very nervously, not wanting to tell Mac how little I knew about the subject, but prepared to spend more time on learning the course material than any of the students. Mac was a fierce teacher and a fantastic actor. More often than once, he would get red in the face and proceed to shred a paper as not befitting a graduate student. I could never figure out how serious he was when he did this. Because of his importance in the field and his status as department chairman, he scared 99% of the class to death, and that goes for me too, his co-teacher. I spent at least one solid week preparing for my first lecture and memorizing every word of it. He told me afterwards it was a terrific, and that I reminded him of Lenny Bernstein. That was enough to calm me throughout the entire 50 minutes of the next class. I didn't quake in my seat for the first time that year. I'll tell you, I really learned a lot of psychology under his guidance that year, and I never told him how nervous I was until he came here with Eleanor and stayed with us. Do you remember them? And then I confessed 20 years later, and I told him what terror I went through that first year and wondered why he ever thought I was competent enough to teach that important course with him. And he told me in his 20-year-old secret, hell, Warren, I figured that was the best way to teach you a little psychology. Did he? It's important for me to give to those individuals in our society who have achieved, who have used their talents to the hilt, who are in a public and visible position, really famous. I really enjoy that kind of giving. It is a form of giving, and it's important to me, I realize now as I write this letter to you, because it's a triple gift. First, to those who receive the honorary degree. Second, to our own students and faculty who get an opportunity to work with, hear, and learn from the distinguished person. And thirdly, to me, especially if it's a way to repay someone for what they've given me or given the world. Giving may be a strange way of putting it, I suppose, but that's what it is. And giving is so much easier, at least for me, and I suspect for most people, than receiving. Don't you love giving gifts more than receiving them? No? I wonder if that's a hang-up of grown-ups who seem to prefer giving than to receive. I mean that, Kate, though it sounds funny to say. The greatest gift, at least for me, is to be able to give. It's very hard for me to receive. Maybe when I get really grown up, I'll be able to receive as graciously as I give. Maybe I work so hard, too hard, I've often been told, so often that I believe it, just so that I can give. Maybe giving is a hidden or subtle form of receiving. Maybe down deep, I want to give so that I won't be in a position of debt, sort of like being inferior or weak or being ungrown up. I wonder if children are more grown up, more generous company in that respect than adults. What do you think? After you okay, this is about his schedule again. After you review the statistics Arlene prepared for me, I will wonder if it was wise for you to abandon the idea of, quote, being a guest when you grow up. I thought you'd be interested in her letter. WB. Here is the material I think you wanted from me for a letter to Kate. August 1974 to December 1976, entertainment at 750, which is our house, 750 Ludlow. Breakfast guests, 97 at 14 occasions. Brunch guests, 117 at 2 occasions, which I just absolutely know is not true because we had brunch every single weekend. They were great. We would get a huge thing of challah, the big that my mom would get at some big bakery downtown with ripe tomatoes and cream cheese and smoked salmon. And we had them every weekend that I can remember in the summer. Okay, so brunch guests, they have 117 at 2 occasions. Luncheon guests, 349 at 58 occasions. Tea guests, 37 at 14 occasions. Reception guests, 744 at 9 occasions. Beer party guests, 14 at 1 occasion. Dinner guests, 795 at 33 occasions. Snack guests, 56 at 2 occasions. I'm sure that these are inadequate, says Arlene, since many more people come to 750 and I don't have the records. They probably can all be increased. If you can think of anything else, just ask me next Monday when I return from vacation. Then this says at 4/19/77. That's from her, Arlene T, 4/19/77. That's a lot. And that's only official entertaining. Can you imagine actually counting the number of guests who we've entertained unofficially? I can't think of all the specifics now, but it includes press conferences, meetings with various university officials, faculty and students, receptions, mainly for groups, usually in the performing arts or the humanities, who seem to be needier than other groups, a reception for Giselle, a dinner for the UC Board of Directors and the Ohio Board of Regents, brunches for faculty who live in Clifton, a farewell party for John Schnur, former president of the student body, a dinner for the Reverend Leon Sullivan, numberless lunches and dinners before football or basketball games, dinner parties for various alumni groups, distinguished guests, city and state officials, and many others. Arlene also figured out that between April 1st, 1972 and June 30th, 1972, period she regards as fairly typical, I gave 32 speeches, attended or chaired 103 meetings, hosted 34 lunches, and went to 71 open houses, drop-ins, brunches, cocktail parties, dinners, coffees, and rap sessions. There were 23 meetings with the press and media, 14 athletic events during the fall and winter months. That figure would go up to about 50. 6 open hour sessions where anybody who wants to can stop by in my office without an appointment to raise questions or talk. Many just come to sit quietly and observe. About 50 show up per session. There were about 170 other meetings held in my office. Just for a moment, take a look at the next page. It's another month of appointments. Again, nothing really different about this month, October 1975. It's pretty much like May 1975, adjusted for seasonal changes. I'll try to pick out some of the things of interest. First of all, I try, mostly in vain, to keep my mornings free of appointments. That's the only time you see to make phone calls, to review my calendar with Arlene. The mornings can also provide time to discuss things with my staff and to have some open time so that the vice presidents and assistants can drop in without an appointment. That period of time is absolutely essential. It may be the only time I ever have, which is not programmed. When you see people by appointment only, everything seems mechanized and controlled. People line up outside my office, rehearsing to themselves what they're going to say, come in, say it, and leave. No time for play, inconsistency, adventure. Sometimes I imagine that people flow through my office like those dolls on an assembly line I once saw when I was a graduate student at MIT doing research. It was a small company called Dewey and Almy, and the dolls were all on hooks until they were dropped into shipping cases. That image comes to my mind on busy days. Appointments chug, 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 people chug, covered with plastic, dropped from their hooks for 10 minutes or 30 minutes, zip, chug, open plastic coating, chug, chug, talk, zip up plastic, chug, rehook, lift up, chug, drop out of sight, chug, something like that. And I wonder sometimes how nice it would be if the assembly line broke down and there was no plastic coating, and I could be with only one person for a long period of time and with another person just to talk about anything without an agenda or purpose. But then I suppose the other plastic coated appointments would jam together. That's about what my life is like in the office, seeing people and talking with them in ones or twos or fours or 16s. Take a look. On October 9th, 1975, the day started with a 7:45 breakfast meeting at the Faculty Center with the Metropolitan Advisory Council, a group organized by our Vice President for Metropolitan Affairs and consisting of a lot of big shots representing the city and county, including county commissioners, the mayor of Cincinnati, the city manager, a few company presidents, the superintendent of schools, the director of public safety, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, a few administrators and faculty from UC, people like Danny Ransahoff, and a sprinkling of other civic leaders. As I recall, the meeting had to do with ways by which the university and the city could work more closely together on some of the city's most urgent problems, such as the quality of water, pollution, how to attract more industry to Cincinnati, and various things like that. After that, I walked to my office and spent some time with Arlene on my schedule. About 35 requests for appointments, speeches, etc. arrive each day. Made as many phone calls as I could, trying to catch up with the calls I have to return. I'm always about 15 behind. Dictated a few letters with Eve. Saw Ellen for half an hour at 11:30 to get some briefing for my 1 p.m. appointment with Bob Womack, a reporter who covers education for the Cincinnati Post. Worked at my desk on correspondence and made more phone calls from 12 to 1. Then I saw Bob Womack, who was interested in questioning me about collective bargaining, which was just starting in earnest between the administration and the faculty. Saw 3 faculty members, each for half an hour. Professors Valentine and Professor Curtis, his daughter knows Roseanne and has been at our house a few times, are both economists who know a lot about collective bargaining, so their advice was important. I asked each of them about one of their graduates, now teaching at Rutgers University, where I would be going October 13th, to learn firsthand about their experience with collective bargaining. I could go just so far reading up on things. I had to experience it directly, which is why I wanted to spend a full day there. Professor Wayne Miller was next. He's in the English department, and he wanted me to appear on a television program he was producing, tracing the historical roots of UC. He also asked if I could help him get a grant so that he could continue his research. Those 3 appointments, hooked together, took longer than I had thought they would, and far longer than Arlene had planned for. So it was about 5:15 before I was able to see Tom Humes. As you may know, I seem to be addicted to running behind on my appointments. Poor Tom had gotten used to that by now, and probably thought that a 45-minute wait was better than he had expected. Those veterans of my waiting room almost always bring reading material and work along with them, knowing that a long wait is inevitable, like going to the doctor's. I don't think my addiction is all that bad, you see, because I always seem to need more time than the schedule allows so that I can get to know the person and so that I can better understand the issue under discussion from all sides, trying to move around a problem a full 360 degrees. That takes time, apparently more time than I should spend. I never seem to be able to keep up with the assembly line of people like others seem to. I'm always like the white queen in Alice in Wonderland, running to stay in one place. At least she stays in the same place, whereas I seem to fall slowly and slowly behind. I wonder sometimes if my running behind is a defense, my individual defense, against a system which makes plastic figures out of people. I wonder sometimes about my own plastic sheath. I left my office around 5:30 p.m. for my 5 o'clock appointment in Hyde Park. This was one of those 2 to 3 month waits I mentioned earlier. I met this person in late June, and she told me that she had many ideas that could help the university. She was an active soul with many good ideas, I thought, and her husband was a top executive downtown. I thought it'd be a splendid addition to our radio station, WGUC, Board of Community Advisors, that she would be a splendid addition. And because a big part of my job includes what is called fundraising, as well as creating what is called a positive image for the university, I thought cultivating both the wife and the husband could have a big payoff for the university. I also liked both of them, which made it all something I enjoyed doing. Somehow I have to psych myself up, as Will would say, into really liking people before I can ask them for money. It wasn't all that difficult. I like raising money for the university. We certainly needed it even more than now. Which reminds me, I forgot to tell you why I was seeing Tom Humes. Tom was the campaign manager in charge of our effort to persuade the voters of Cincinnati to vote yes on June 8th. Yes for UC to become a full member of Ohio State system of higher education. We had to win the election. Winning, I said in speech after speech, isn't everything. It is the only thing. Our financial future and virtually the survival of UC depended on that vote. If we lost, well, I don't know what we would have done. Winning meant high quality education at UC and less tuition for our students to pay. A loss would have sent us quickly down the road of decay. It was as simple as that. It was survival time. I started to drive back to our house, arriving, I had hoped, in time for dinner. But as usual, I got lost, and a 20-minute drive turned into a 2-hour nightmare. I knew I should have had Bruce drive me there and wait. So did everyone else, most of all Arlene, who warned me about getting lost, and so did Bruce, who wanted to take me as he suspected I wouldn't make it home in time for dinner if I drove myself, despite the large and detailed map that he had taken that had taken him what seemed like 3 hours to draw for my solo. It turned out that his hand-drawn masterpiece contained one fatal mistake. In spite of his concern that I would get terribly confused because the future WGUC board member lived in Grandin Avenue and Grandin Drive, right in the same area, there was a Grandin Road, a Grandin Lane, a Grandin Place, Grandin something else I can't remember. And he drew the map so that I went to the lane rather than the drive, or was it the other way around? In any case. Anyway, by the time I arrived home and you and everyone else had already eaten, I was angry, and the anger didn't relieve my guilt or my sadness, which everyone must have noticed because someone said, "Kickball!" And we all ran from the kitchen to the front of the house, with the steps going up to the porch, serving as a backstop. We played a long time, I recall, long after we could see the wet plastic fluorescent ball, holding on to our time together as if it were the last time we would all be together, playing into the dark, kicking an invisible ball into the night, holding the clock hands still, pretending the sun was on our side, while we rolled on the grass and hugged our happiness. Why do I always get lost when I drive? I seem to lack a sense of direction. During World War II, I led a company of men across 3 countries and hundreds of miles, reading maps and compasses, and on occasion the stars. That's strange, isn't it? I wonder if I get lost on purpose. That's hard to believe, though. I mean, why in the world would I get lost on purpose? I have to think about that. Someday, Kate, I hope you read a book called Remembrance of Things Past by a French writer, Marcel Proust. It's the only book he ever wrote, and it is a masterpiece. One of my favorite lines in the book is, quote, "An hour is not just an hour. It is a vase full of perfume, sounds, projects, and moods." Don't you like that? A vase full of perfume, sounds, projects, and moods. That's a pretty accurate description of life in my office. You see, I do like to be active, and I do like to meet different kinds of people, such as the architect who's interested in restoring old houses and who wants to keep Sacred Heart from being torn down, or the 5 women filmmakers from New York enchanted with making dreams, or the group of retired UC professors who asked to have the university provide a small sum of money so that they could have access to a Xerox machine and a modest amount of funds for travel to continue their research, or the courageous, so tiny in size and large in stature, Archbishop Dom Camara of Recife, Brazil, a Catholic priest who practically by himself forced his own country to reduce, if not abandon, their inhumane and gross practice of torturing citizens who did nothing more than question certain government actions. I like meeting with this one and that one, most of all, if in the meeting I can help a good cause, or if the person, like Dom Camara, embodies and fights for that portion of our soul that safeguards our humanness. Honestly, Kate, I believe that is the best kept secret in the world. the recognition that all of us, everyone, needs something, a cause, an ideal, a faith, something outside of ourselves, outside of our relationships with loved ones, to dedicate a part of our lives to. We'd rather possess that dedication than lead lives of pampered idleness. That's why serving as the university president has been important to me, why my interests and energies have never lessened, despite the long days away from you and the family. I was able to make things happen, although at times only a sliver of progress could be seen. Another thing a little harder to explain, I really get an enormous kick out of making connections between ideas, between people, between races and religions, between generations, between UC and the city and the state of Ohio, between various academic disciplines like physics and English, or between business administration and foreign language. I just get immoderately tickled when I can bring 2 or 3 different things, whether people or ideas or whatever, together like a weaver. And we can fuse all the colors of the rainbow into one cloth. When that happens, never enough, of course, it's a magical chord of life, like a perfumed vase filled with the sounds and projects and moods and invisible wet plastic kickball. I also like moving from one vase to another like a bumblebee, from blossom to blossom, making honey while it sings its praise in the growth of beauty. One night I can remember introducing Lord Briggs to an audience made up of the city's leaders. He talked on the bicentennial theme, English music culture, 1776, 1876, 1976. Following that, I went to Tangeman Union to meet with some Black students who wanted to spend some time with Dick Gregory, then over 2 months into his fast. He was attempting to dramatize the problems of world hunger. I didn't want to leave, but I had to in order to interview a prospective football coach. At midnight, I was called by our lawyer, who said he thought it was urgent that I should meet with our collective bargaining team to review strategy for their next negotiation session. Crazy, I know, but I like all of it. And each event by itself doesn't cause the kick it gives me. It's the goofy combination I like. Some about those vases of projects and sounds. I like myself too when I can turn from one thing and then another abruptly to a totally different thing, gaining inner strength and perspective from incongruity, using every single part of myself, expanding my vocabulary of feelings, creating a new etiquette for living, generating as much light and hope as I can, growing, learning, changing as I move through the days and nights of vases filled with perfume, sounds, projects, and moods. Every once in a while, more often over the past year or so, I do let things get out of hand. What I mean is that I try to do too much and I feel as if I'm in one of those moving sidewalks, like the one at the Denver airport, which Will loves to run on backwards, and John likes to think of as a groovy trampoline. When I get swept along like that, I feel as if I were a mechanical man, a robot, battery run, noiseless, lights flashing to signal, wheeling around on my tracks. And I begin to wonder when my batteries run down, why I create for myself, my family, and my friends such a life. It's always been that way with me. Running through life so quickly, it seems, I don't have a chance to smell the flowers. Yuck. I remember a cartoon, if that's what you call a drawing with caption, that conversed more meaning to me than humor. That cartoonist was Abner Dean, and I recall seeing it long before you were born, around 1956 or 57. He drew people without clothes on, though I hesitate to call them nude, because men and women could barely be distinguished, like stick figures. In this particular cartoon, there was a dry, parched landscape cracked with drought and dotted with dying cactus plants, on which a small railroad track could be seen, abruptly ending in front of an open food stand, like a hot dog or lemonade stand. Sitting on the counter of this rickety stand, surrounded by a crowd of people, was a man who appeared to be the owner. Upon looking more closely, you could see they were so needy that they were actually eating him, rather. They looked as if they were nibbling on him. He looked as if he were enjoying it, which surprised me. The caption read, "Sometimes you can give too much of yourself." Let me play If I Were You. If I were you, I would be in a state of continual rage about organizations and their leaders. Because every time a phone call from the office interrupts a conversation, every time a trip to Columbus comes before an outing with the family, every time you notice a darker ring under my eyes and a sallow face, which means less time for kickball in the dark, every time I feel that you, me, are too involved with other people, their voices, other rooms, I would wonder why work or business or the university is more important than I am, than mom is, than my brothers are, than we all are. That's what I would think if I were you. And I would despise it. And at times, could I despise you? I'm reminded of a little poem a friend wrote. It's called a haiku, a Japanese poem, which is very stylized, always 3 short lines. It goes like this. There will, yes, be time for suns rising and setting in these greenhouses. I need to remind myself that we all need, yes, more time.